Ta-da!
Welcome to This Mystic Life podcast, a podcast that aims to look at the world differently, with total responsibility for sight. In this episode called Let All Things Be, the encouragement is to let it fly, to move into a non-restricted, authentic, natural way of being, under Christ's control, and that's the caveat. And so, as we let it fly, as we allow all things to be exactly as they are, and as we come to an honest, meaning consistent approach and response to looking at the world, to forgiving what we are perceiving, and then to come for guidance to the Holy Spirit, so that we can be in our right mind as we proceed. This can become an involuntary movement in the mind once we are under Christ's control. So that's what this episode's about. It's part one of 2 parts. The second, I have no idea when it will appear. Well, I felt inspired to sit down and share a recording. And I don't know if you can hear this, but there's something trundling in place outside the window, like right outside. Like something between a school bus and a garbage truck kind of size and sound. I'm not going to pull back the curtains because it feels more worthy of welcome than negotiation of, purpose and place. And that just feels amazing to me. Power breaks, off it goes. I feel like there's just an essential element that we all continuously miss, and that's the acceptance of what is. We've been trained over particularly the last 10 years, but over the last 20 years to become intolerant of discomfort that, according to our beliefs and culture and desires that are fashion of the time, cause us to reject what is under a drop-down menu of justification of judgment. And in A Course in Miracles it says anger is never justified. It doesn't mean, though, that you won't experience anger, or that you're wrong for experiencing anger, or that there's no place for anger, because I feel that anger is a desire for something to be different than it is. And it's the indignant quality and the self-righteousness that comes with it that makes it not just intolerant, but intolerable to be around in ourselves and in others. And when you accept that intolerance is a very pure desire for something that you thought keeps you safe and the world regulated, and a system of, albeit false, control and organization over the Maya and mesmerism upon which you look every day, then I just want to reach out and give you a big hug. Maybe not while you're all elbows and pointy and steaming with rage. And yet when I look, I see in myself and in others a small, tired 3-year-old who's intolerant of bedtime, who doesn't understand that it's for its own good, and that it's not an unkindness or a separation or a sequestering away from the family or exciting things or TV or whatever little games it's been playing. And when we can come into that level of self-acceptance, capital S, self is the only one that can look kindly upon these little multiplicity of selves, and we just allow all things to be exactly as they are. The true melt and compassion and kindness that is the gentleness that it's one of the 10 characteristics of a teacher of God will swell your heart. And I would say that the self-righteousness and the entitlement and the rules and regulations that every which way, there's so many sides now. There's definitely not just two. It's a tetrahedron multiplied by infinity of sides that people are taking and opposing others in this moment. And if we can come back into that compassion as we look at what is, we can harness, just like the juice of joy in something that you love, that you consider a whim, that you hope would be given, a preference that you have handed over in purpose to the Holy Spirit. Your passion, and your passion as it displays as anger, can also be harnessed by the Holy Spirit. And the last thing someone who's feeling indignant needs is admonishment. That's just like throwing fuel on the fire. And so if we can use that, well, yes, right, then feeling, or the very true and pure no, that your yea be yea and your nay be nay, that can come from us, and give it over in a movement towards what's truly helpful, without even trying to logically understand that or know what it is or anything. In giving that very movement over without further condemnation, without further judgment, without a further assessment that it will right or wrong or right or in any way have a specific outcome. The purity, you can hear it, the purity in the movement with no attachment to outcome, even if it's a rebuke, even as we know that if you defend yourself, you're attacked. But if you release yourself in authenticity from the objective being an outcome in form, then you're already heading towards an energetic yielding because of the handing over and the release from fear of outcomes. And I know that a lot of you are sitting there very good social citizens thinking, well, that sounds dangerous. That's going to lead to upheaval and chaos and people just like throwing punches or doing what they want. But it's the release from the attachment to the outcome and it giving you what you need when what you needed was the release that is the difference here. And in the willingness, and this is something I've seen a lot of people talking about recently, which is kind of funny to me, of throwing A Course in Miracles across the room, has freed so many students up to be able to then later, when sweeping their floor, presumably, or when they were done using it as a doorstop, to pick up the book once more. It actually ended the self-destruction energetic movement. And I've been listening recently to Bhagavad Gita, the Vedanta teachings, and the whole teaching there was towards a purity of non-attachment in the movement. And I feel that that movement, that yoga, in handing everything over to the spirit, is kind of what's coming through in this moment. Many of you probably think that I sit around thinking about things before I start speaking, but I literally don't. I press go and it comes, and it's very elucidating for all of us. And in the release, there's two things. There's the authenticity, which grades on many of those energetic scales and measuring things as the highest form of energetics because it's undivided. And then there's also the sense of release from the distress and, let's call it like, the heaviness or darkness that shame and guilt and blame that, truly causes the outburst of anger. It's not just a feeling that something is right or wrong. The explosive nature of it within ourselves is coming from the shame and guilt and the perceived condemnation, whether it's exterior or interior. It doesn't really matter. Whether we're judging others or ourselves, it really doesn't matter. And the need to set things straight, not according to any set of coherent rules even, but just to push off the incredibly stinging sensation and terror of annihilation that has beset the persona. And it's truly far easier come to Christ from that explosive state of raw, authentic to the character, which isn't true authenticity, but it's as close as it gets in form. Raw, authentic response where pure hurt is met with pure hurt. And I would like to caution us from dampening down the passion that we feel, as well as encouraging us to harness it in a way that's harmless. Not by trying or cultivating an attitude or sitting there burning up and, getting an ulcer, but really in transmuting that energetic and experience by seeing, as you move it through the seeming static self of a self-concept and a body and a world and a habitat and wherever you seem to find yourself and live, if you can release attachment to the outcome and still allow the full drive of execution, what a good word, I feel it's almost like angels will be sent to, like Jacob on the altar, intervene. And what do I mean by that? Well, we know God knows not of this world, and yet the answer has been given, and the higher self that is you is primordially in control, because you're at home in heaven dreaming of exile. There isn't a return you need to make except a release that you need to accept. And so, a bit like the Taoist principles of flow, there's something that we've been missing, especially in spiritual circles, about an authentic system of release, where we don't try and hold back a movement so much as harness the movement as it occurs. And I had a very interesting experience one time, years and years ago. There was a lot of emotions being allowed up, and I was with a partner, and this intensity grew. And suddenly I just felt to give myself permission to move as I would if I had zero judgment. In response to what I was experiencing and feeling and perceiving, I allowed myself to move freely without judgment. My reaction was, as we sat in the car, to pick up the car keys. Car keys have a nice, very long, stab of them, and to try and stick it into his thigh. I just released myself, and the more I didn't pretend and honed myself into genuinely trying to stab him in the thigh with the car keys, the more and more he laughed, and the less close I got to being able to do it. He was very adept and was able to move out. But in the same way that I'm describing this to you, I feel like there is a safety rail. There is a higher calling in the mind that is taking care of everything. And the more we can relax and rest back into that being cared for, the more we can even very quickly allow spikes of anger or terror or fear or frustration, however it appears, up sharply without hiding them to process later. And then let them clear. And the non-attachment to them and the non-shame of them arising can allow us just an incredible sense of release, and immediately we're back in flow. Not only that, but we're very alive and lit and present to what is unfolding for ourselves and others. Also, those around you, also very alive and lit and present to what's happening for you. And so the entire scene is energized, not necessarily now in a lockdown loop of tit for tat or spite. Actually, it frees up the tit for tat and spite. That was one of the initial purposes of exposing what we would often term private thoughts that we would want to keep and hide. The idea was not to hurt or harm another by exposing these dark and insidious thoughts. It was to release ourselves from the idea that they were our thoughts. And so I feel like there's a whole element of release that's needed in the mind. And I'm not suggesting any type of behavior one way or another to anyone. It's not about that. It's about noticing the tightness of things. And a lot of conversations have been had recently about false responsibility versus responsibility for sight. And a friend of mine with whom I was talking kept reinserting the personal responsibility. And I could hear in the conversation that we were having that we hadn't yet made a dent in the understanding that the personal responsibility idea is the problem. Just that personal sense of self was the interference. And as a seeming woman in the world, I've always noticed, coming from a country where men like to drink and there'd be bar brawls after hours outside on the street, how quick the release was in allowing that energetic movement, how swiftly the disagreements were done away with. Whereas as women, we would sit and stew in grievances and manipulations and maniacal means for years, extruding and taking our pound of flesh when we could. I don't care how loving and noble you are. It's a predisposition if you're not allowed to express, and it's not acceptable to express anger in the moment as you feel it. And while I'm not suggesting that violence is the answer in any shape or form, I do feel it's time to take a look at our responsibility for the energetics of response that we need in relation and relationship to our emotions, especially as females. So that's how I'm going to talk about it right now for a moment. I read a post from someone I follow. She's a rancher in Montana and, left everything she knew and came out to follow a dream, found the love of her life, started a ranching business, started a following online, put her whole heart and soul into everything. And then, like so many who have been on this optimization kick and being, we've all tried to be clever and out with the system and do our own research and find out what's really true, and then, adapt to that and circumvent it and grow our own food and make it accessible and be in harmony, and taking steps every time something informed threw up a roadblock. We weren't going to let it grind us down. We were going to find a way around that. And one of the last posts I saw from her said something akin to, the food is poisoned. It was an acceptance. She's like, the food is poisoned. And she laid out a few things she was noticing, and that she was simply sharing she's not going to try anymore. And I feel that if we can, without being despondent, really notice how much we have in place where we're keeping the plates spinning and how much fear is still motivating that. Her post was beautiful, it was authentic, and it was fearless. And there was a level of maturity and acceptance in it which was beautiful. She didn't care whether you agreed or disagreed with her. Many of her followers probably were people who were still very much on that hamster wheel of trying to circumvent the system. And I feel we have to be very attentive to not stymieing any authentic response that arises, and also to be swift about handing it over to the spirit and channeling it, like even mid-punch. I've seen myself mid-nasty sentence when I realized what I had started saying and that I didn't want to say it, and deciding that I could hand it over in the middle of the sentence. And I've watched it land differently, and the tone or intonation or something change in what I was saying, that the result, instead of being like some kind of a fight with someone else, resulted in laughter. And so what we want to do is catch ourselves when we're unaware. And as we watch sometimes an action that cannot be stopped mid-flow, but the judgment can. And to find in that moment the compassion for what's unfolding and the forgiveness, then the outcomes in form will also be changed, because it won't be a reflection of judgment. And judgment really is, I'm going to use the word most harmful, is the element that we need to question the most. And we all know I'm a proponent of accepting that you're mistaken. Practically should get some t-shirts made. And that's because I think we're not even aware of just how controlled every second of every day is. No matter how long you've been on a path, how inauthentic your movement through time and space is. Regulated, whether from the exterior or the interior sense of self. And if we could begin to question why we're doing nearly everything we're doing, very gently though, not in a way that stops you doing it or curtails your movement in the moment, but simply allows that aware watching with the Holy Spirit from a sense of safety and wholeness. Because you don't evacuate a loop by trying to get out of it or trying to change it. If you perceive a pattern or a loop that you've seemingly been in time and time again, or a friend of yours has been in time and time again, the only thing you can do that is truly compassionate is to watch it without judgment. You may be given insights, you may have understanding, and yet you don't want to inflict those upon yourself or your friend. You really want them to be allowed, a bit like a slowing hurdy-gurdy, as we used to call them, like the waltzers, which are like almost like a teacup shaped thing that twirls on its own casters within the greater merry-go-round at high speed. Something teenagers would love. And yet what used to happen as it slowed right down was you couldn't jump off. You'd still get injured if you tried to get off the ride. Is to watch it and enjoy the little rhythm of the lulls, of the swings and the swishes and the seeming starts and stops and the seeming greater effect of gravity upon you. And if you can allow it to all center down quietly of itself, the you that goes on of itself, as Alan Watts calls it, and not interfere, and not try to falsely buoy yourself up or extract yourself prematurely from the movement in the mind, from the pendulum that is swinging. And in withdrawal of your investment and attachment to the outcomes and form, and association with the movement in the mind, and personal identification and fear of the outcomes in form, then it will slowly dissolve rather than resolve, dissolve itself back into a non-capturing experience. And you, who you are in truth, will be released. And when we start to give ourselves over in this energetic way, you don't hear me talk about energetics a lot. It just feels very potent and purposeful right now. When you give yourself over, when you allow your Tyler Durden moment to take you, then healing can happen, and so much swifter and ultimately less painful, because I equate time with pain, and so much cleaner a release because of the bigness of perhaps how things would play out momentarily for you. And if anyone's wondering what I'm talking about with Tyler Durden is the fake character in Fight Club, the alter ego that materializes to fight the lead character's battles because he's so stymied. And that's probably a good movie to watch with this in mind. It's far better for us to acknowledge that we're raging angry and attached, that we liked having a clean food supply, that we preferred to know our produce was organic, that we wished we'd started growing gardens 3 years ago when Sarah told us to, that we believed that we should and it should be different, that it would be better if it was different. And I'm here today to remind you that it wouldn't. It wouldn't have been better if there hadn't been a truck outside the window when I sat down to press record. Because I possibly would have recorded something completely different. And this is the mind's call for what we speak about. And it's under no laws but God's. And there is nothing of time and space that you need to worry about or correct for. Let all your movements be from pure inspiration of, yes, I would like this. Not, no, I don't want that. By all means, accept that you have a no, I don't want that. But focus then on the purity of the yes, I do for this. And do only that. Beyond this world, there is a world you want. And if we keep focusing on the world we don't want, then we're misusing our creative ability. And we have a great fear that we can miscreate. And yet your focus is what fulfills your experience. So be very attentive, not to blinkering yourself while you're still fearful of potential outcomes in form that you're like do 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 with your fingers in your ears, but purely decide that even if, like my beautiful rancher said, the food is poisoned according to the laws of the world, what are you guided to do in this moment? You might be guided to go to the movies. You might be guided to pick up some seeds when you're at the grocery store. You might be guided to eat frozen food. It doesn't really matter. The question is that it has to be in the affirmative. Once you've cleared your no and used the clarity to cut away whole drop-down menus and swathes of investigation and energy drain and fighting and fixing and finagling in form, It has to be, and now what? Now, now, now. What, where, when, who, and how. And the Holy Spirit's the how. Remember, fear is an outcome in form. It's not a quality of content in the mind. It's not your natural inheritance. And you can only have a future fear, because present fear is of the intimacy of the love. It's not anything of fear of form and time and space. And so, if your no is to the world, but your yes is to the Spirit, then you need not worry about your alignment with outside factors. Because that alignment and that focus on mirroring eternal realities will keep you aligned, lit, and alive. And by that I mean in the eternal way, to the truth of who you are. And when you're aligned, lit, and alive to the truth of who you are, just like Jesus said to the apostles when he sent them out, take no thought for the morrow. And yet if he'd also told them to plant vegetables, I'm sure they would have. But that wasn't the season they were in, or the ministry they had. And despite my encouraging of everyone to grow vegetables for 3 years, I am now completely divested of all that I had acquired that I thought would allow me to do so, for myself even. Because I am to continue to be like an apostle, more like a seed upon the breeze, bringing the good word and the good news that you are under no laws but God's. And when you take that seed firmly into your heart and plant it there, it will not only grow and sustain you like manna from heaven, but it will flourish in such a way that everyone who you touch and comes into contact with you will also be fed. And the lilies of the field neither toil nor spin, and they are arrayed in such a beautiful manner. And yet we are coming to a cusp where it seems like the final nail, death knell, in the self-responsibility in a false way is going to reroute us back to struggling to exist and survive. And we want to be very attentive that that's not where we let our devotion funnel us. Because if you're being funneled by fear of food shortages, fear of transportation and supply chain lacks or degradation, if you're being floated by fear into living in a place that you do not feel called to be, that makes you feel isolated and remote, then you need to question what season you're in and what is guided for you. Let all action be involuntarily as a miracle. Let all activity spring from joy. And let all that you put your focus on and your ideas of a future towards be of an eternal harvest and safety in mind. The actions will feel involuntary. We don't need to plan in a desperate way. Communities will come together. We don't need to organize in a frightened fashion. And the one thing, having worked with communities over the years, is that without a joint purpose, a very high and specific joint purpose, a community cannot flourish. It will eventually, because of the split desires and the multiplicity of secret and unknown desires that are held amongst the members, dissipate and decrease. Staying alive is not a good enough motivation for being in a community together. There has to be something higher that calls the mind into unity so that it can find a way, almost like a rule of thumb, like our rules for decision, to align itself against as things unfold. And I feel it's also very important to remember that, as Jesus told the apostles, take no thought for what you would eat or what you would wear. And I wouldn't be surprised if my lovely rancher comes back in a few months, because she's also a woman of faith, with a renewed focus on transcendence once she's had a rest. So for now, let your focus be the renewing of your mind. And if farming stems from that, that will be beautiful. Inch by inch, row by row, going to make this garden grow. John Denver, one of the first Course in Miracles students that I ever knew.